Good morning, everyone. Good evening for everyone too. It is a pleasure to have you here today. We are going to have this webinar, Innovative Risk Financing Approaches to Enhance Ecosystem Resilience Along the Caribbean's Coastlines. Before we start, I'm going to share with you some logistical announcements. We are going to have a simultaneous interpretation. So in the Zoom controls, please click on interpretation. Click on the language you want to hear. And if you want to hear only the interpreted language, please click on mute original audio. We're gonna share some basic rules of the seminar. This space encourages learning and respect. Microphones and cameras will be disabled during the seminar. Please write your full name, country, and organization in the chat. You can submit your questions in the chat section of Zoom. And if you participate via Facebook Live, you can submit your question through the comment section. The speaker will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. The opinions expressed in the webinars are the sole responsibility of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the opinion of or position of Marfan. Now we are ready to start. I'm going to introduce you to Jack Stewart from Aura, who will be moderating this webinar. Welcome, Jack. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and welcome. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. So my name's Jack Stewart, and I'm a Senior Associate at the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, or AURA. I'm delighted to be moderating this webinar today on innovative risk financing approaches to enhancing ecosystem resilience along the Caribbean coastlines. So I'm going to give a brief intro and provide some framing before we jump into our excellent panelists here today to dive into the details about the work which has been achieved over the past couple of years. So for those who do not know, AURA is a multi-sector collaboration connecting international finance and insurance sectors, governments, multilaterals, civil society, and stakeholders from the Global South to pioneer finance and insurance products which incentivize investment into coastal and ocean nature-based solutions to deliver a sustainable and regenerative blue economy and resilient coastal communities. Our mission by 2030 is to activate at least $500 million USD of investment into coastal and ocean nature-based solutions through finance and insurance products, and in so doing, help build the resilience of 250 million climate-vulnerable coastal people. So we are an alliance of over 100 members now, and many of the speakers today are part of this alliance. And we work with these members to create the enabling environment, leverage our networks, our expertise and investments to build a pipeline of finance and insurance products and deliver the system-wide change we need to develop to see a sea change in ocean finance. So AURA is incredibly proud to have supported a lot of these early efforts by the Mar Fund and by many other panelists you'll hear from today to develop reef insurance solutions for the Caribbean region. It's incredible to think about how far we've come in so little time. 7 years ago, coral reef insurance did not exist. And the mere fact that we have all these panelists with us today who are piloting and implementing these types of innovations is just incredibly impressive, and we're delighted to have joined them in this journey. So obviously, we all know this, but coral reefs provide invisible and often free ecosystem and economic services, which are quite often not valued or accounted for. AURA's Coastal Risk Index, which is a tool to help measure this, has found that around $363 billion of coastal assets would be at risk of flooding without the protective benefits that ecosystems like coral reefs provide. And yet, because these values are not properly recognized and integrated, they're often neglected, especially when they're damaged by extreme weather events such as hurricanes. And obviously, we also know that beyond the protection value, they also form the backbone of many ocean and coastal economies, whether we're talking about food security, income for coastal communities, as well as being a home to the quarter of all marine life on Earth. So in the region we're talking about specifically today, the MAR region, we know that the Mesoamerican reef provides annual environmental services estimated at approximately 400 million USD in coastal protection, fishing, and reef-related tourism. But we also know that they face significant threats. These include climate change, coastal runoff, overfishing, marine heat waves, and many others. So with this picture, financing both the restoration and the resilience of these vital ecosystems is crucial, and we need to identify innovative ways to do this. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce many of these innovators today who are here to share their experience about developing and implementing these products on the ground, the successes which we've had, but also the lessons learned, which can be applied as we think about how we scale and replicate these solutions. So I'm going to walk through the panelists now, but they'll also introduce themselves more fully when they give their presentations. So we have Claudia Ruiz from the MAR Fund, Sarah Conway from WTW, Pablo Divis from Fundo Acción, Cristina Sanchez from Forever Costa Rica, and Israel Muniz from Healthy Reefs for Healthy People. So I'm now going to hand over to these presenters who are each going to take around 10 minutes each to walk through some of the types of products which have been successfully implemented and some of the groundbreaking research and work on the ground which has accompanied them. We're then going to move into a panel discussion where we're going to start really diving into the details, and that will also include questions from the audience. So please do add your questions, as Claudia said, either into the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live, and then we will close. So thank you very much. Again, pleasure to be here. And I will now hand over to Claudia Ruiz to begin the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Claudia Ruiz. I work for the Mesoamerican Reef Fund as the Reef Rescue Initiative Coordinator. And today we are going to speak about the insurance innovations in the Mesoamerican Reef region, specifically about the MAR insurance program. Next, please. For those who are joining us for the first time, I would like to introduce MAR Fund a little bit and the Mesoamerican Reef region. MAR Fund is a regional environmental fund. We are regional private environmental fund, non-profit, and we work in the 4 countries of the Mesoamerican Reef region. And our mission is to drive regional funding and to build alliances and capacities in support of the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of the Mesoamerican Reef. The Mesoamerican Reef region is the largest barrier reef in the Western Hemisphere, and it runs across 4 countries, starting in Quintana Roo, in Mexico, Quintana Roo, the coast of Quintana Roo, I mean. It runs across Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, and it delivers billions of dollars annually in different environmental services, supporting the economy of more than 2 million people in the 4 countries. Next, please. But despite all the benefits and beauty of the Mesoamerican Reef region, climate change is one of the main threats that the coral reefs faces. So in the face of the climate change, hurricanes have increased in intensity and frequency, and they can cause damages, different type of damages to people and to infrastructure and to natural ecosystems. In the case of coral reefs, these photos that you can see here on this slide are actual examples, of damages that can impact the live coral cover and the functions of the coral reefs ecosystems. But there is that opportunity to attend these damages and to rescue the reefs. For this, of course, we need funding and capacities in order to respond to the emergency and to provide attention to the reef post-storm. Next, please. One of the opportunities that we have is, or the solution, I would say in this case, is an insurance for risk, for example. The Mesoamerican Reef Insurance Program is a regional program which main objective is to implement a cost-effective insurance to cover the hurricane risk to the Mar region. And this program helps us to understand the risk. Through our risk analysis, we are able to understand the risk, and by understanding the risk, it is possible to transfer the risk to a disaster risk financing mechanism that is, in this case, the parametric insurance. The program also allows us to prepare to respond to the risk. By understanding the risk, it is possible not only to transfer the risk and to implement an insurance, but also to be prepared and to implement all the instruments and materials that we need and capacities to respond to the risk. And with this, we contribute to the recovery of the coastal ecosystem, in this case, the coral reef ecosystems, and at the end, to contribute also to enhance the resilience of the reef ecosystem and of the people that depend on the reef for their livelihoods. So basically, in summary, please, the next, please. In summary, the Mar Insurance Program has several components. One of these main components is, as I mentioned before, the insurance instrument, which is the mechanism that is going to provide the immediate funds to respond to the damages caused by hurricanes. These funds are going to be used to repair the reef, and we're going to see a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So another instrument and another main component of the program is the response capacities, which are these people that are, or the group of people that are formalized and trained and have all the abilities and tools to respond to the damage and to provide immediate attention to the reef when the reef is impacted by hurricanes. How the program works, how do we work? In the case of the Mar Insurance Program, the Mar Fund we act as the policyholder. As I mentioned before, we are a regional environmental fund. We work in the 4 countries. So this allows us to act in this case as the policyholder. As the policyholder, we have been purchasing the insurance premium for 4 years now, and we purchased the insurance with funds from donations. We have been raising funding, and several donors have provided these funds to cover the price of the premium. Some of these donors are included here in the logos that you can see in this slide. When there is an event or a hurricane that reaches the parameter that has been set or pre-agreed at the parameter that would trigger payout, when there is an event that triggers the parameter, there is a payout. The payout, excuse me one second. Excuse me. So when there is a payout, the payout goes directly to Mar Fund. We receive the payout through another mechanism, which is the emergency fund. The emergency fund is another mechanism that we have established to attend different types of emergencies. But in this case, emergencies to coral reefs, but in this case, the emergency fund is also the account that is going to receive and administer the payout from the insurance. When Mar Fund receives the payout, we deliver the funds to the emergency groups, to these emergency groups that have been trained and formalized that will attend the damages. And we deliver the funding to the site that has been impacted by the event. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, so where are we located right now? What are the sites that are covered by the insurance? As I mentioned before, we have placed 4 years of coverage right now, starting in 2021. And right now we have to this year, we have 11 sites that are covered by the insurance. We started in 2021 with four sites covered. And this is the map. As you can see in the map, the different sites that are covered by the insurance. These are actually protected areas, entire protected areas that include healthy reefs or very reefs in good state. And so basically, and this is the other map that you can see with the circles is how the model looks. If you want to have more information and how about how the insurance is being modeled and how what are the type of data that we use and how is the parameter analyzed, you can see in our website. I'm going to share with you a brief that includes of this type of information. You know how the insurance is modeled. But what I wanted to say now is that we have covered almost the entire Mesoamerican Reef region, right? And so basically, in all of these sites, we have also established the reef response groups, the reef response capacities. As I said before, this is also a main component. Because when we have the funds, we need people that are trained and have all the necessary knowledge and capacities and abilities to respond to the damages and to help and contribute to assess the damage and to repair the reef. These capacities, as you can see here in these 4 squares that you see, the capacities have several pillars. The main pillar is the early warning and emergency response protocol that was developed by TNC and partners in 2018. And this instrument has all the activities that the response groups are going to implement before, during, and after the storm. So also in order to oversee and coordinate the response actions, we have established the governance, which are the reef response coordinating committees that are going to, as I said before, oversee and coordinate the response. And these committees are led by governmental organizations, by the governmental authorities that are in charge of managing the reef. And the committees also have people from different sectors, and these committees we have been working with these committees in order to train brigades. We have trained 168 brigades, brigade members, reef responders of reef guardians, and all of them make up 16 brigades in the entire Mesoamerican Reef. We have also trained trainers, people that are trained to train more brigade members. And every committee has built the response plans, which is site-specific. We have the protocol, which is regional, and the response plans are site-specific. These plans also have all the activities that the brigades are going to conduct during an emergency in order to attend emergency. And so we have 11 sites for 7 committees. There is one committee that are overseeing a couple of sites. So basically, for example, in Mexico, 2 sites have 1 committee. This is the way that the countries have decided that they're going to work. Next, please. This is an example of how the instrument works. The instrument had been tested. There was a payout in November 2022 when Hurricane Lisa struck Turnip Atoll, one of the sites that have been covered by the insurance since the beginning. And this event triggered a payout of $175,000 for the site to respond to the damages. And the brigades were mobilized, and the region or the entire protected area was assessed, and some primary response actions were implemented as well. So the thing is that when we received the payout, after this event, Marfon received the payout in a couple of weeks, and we started delivering the funds in 2 days after we received the funds. Next, please. With this, I can mention that, please click. Okay, thank you. Click them all. I have said click on that. Okay, thank you. Yes. So basically, with this, we can summarize that the program has several benefits. One of the benefits is the replicability, and we have been working with ORA in order to replicate this program in other sites, because we have learned that the components and the elements of the program allow the program to be scalable, not only to other sites, but also to potentially to other risks and assets. And this is one of the benefits, main benefits of this program, and that's why we are here now. We are going to have the opportunity to learn more about the efforts that we have been making with other partners such as ORA and Fondo Acción and Costa Rica for Siempre in order to analyze the possibility and the feasibility of replicating this program in the regions and to also protect coral reefs from different hazards. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for that excellent overview. And I think it's really interesting to hear about the journey, as you said, you've been on in terms of developing this product, but also now how we're thinking about how this product can be expanded additionally to the sites you mentioned, but also how it can be expanded to different regions and also to different types of risks and ecosystems. So before we jump into that kind of analysis, and I want to hand over to Sarah Conway from WTW to give the insurance perspective and really deep dive into how these kinds of mechanisms work. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks everybody for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon. As Jack mentioned, my name is Sarah Conway, and I'm with WTW's Disaster Risk Finance team. You can go to the next slide, please. So as part of our recent ORA project, working with Marfund and partners, WTW's role was essentially sort of threefold, all centered around sort of how to protect coral reefs from different risks. So the first one related to hurricane risk. As Claudia mentioned earlier, hurricanes can cause quite a lot of damage to coral reef ecosystems. And this was especially true in 2020 in Colombia. The reefs around San Andreas and Providencia were severely impacted by those events. So in this first piece of the project, we really sought to expand on the success of the MAR insurance program and essentially replicate that parametric insurance product that Claudia helpfully walked through for San Andreas and Providencia in Colombia, working in close collaboration with Fondo Acción. The second and third that you see here were much more kind of feasibility studies, right? So in Costa Rica, we focused on marine heat waves and sort of the potential for a parametric solution to be structured to address coral bleaching that results from marine heat waves. And finally, in Belize, working with Marfund and with inputs from the Banana Growers Association, we looked at the feasibility for a prearranged, more forecast-based finance solution to help to minimize fertilizer runoff into the reef ecosystem. So those were kind of the three components of our involvement in the ORA funded project. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick flavor for sort of the findings of those three components. So for the hurricane risk to San Andreas and Providencia, we designed a gridded parametric or cat and nested circles structure. You can see that here with these fun concentric circles or ellipses. We validated that with our proprietary coral reef damage model. And we found, a very positive enabling environment for the, launch of this structure. And I believe, Fondo Acción will go into that in a bit more detail. But basically, this one, strong technical and implementation feasibility was found. The second one related to marine heat waves. So in this case, we use NOAA Degree Heating Weeks, NOAA's Coral Reef Watch, which provides daily satellite-based sea surface temperature data in 5-kilometer grid cells and produces a Degree Heating Weeks index, which captures both the severity and the duration of extreme heat stress and ultimately sort of measures the degree of thermal stress on a coral reef ecosystem. So just to give you an appreciation for sort of what that looks like or sort of what those values equate to, a Degree Heating Weeks value of 4 means that bleaching is sort of likely. And as it gets higher, specifically as it reaches a value of 8, then widespread bleaching and mortality are likely. So it's a good proxy data for bleaching, essentially. we validated this NOAA data with some historical bleaching event information and also actually some in-water aqualink buoy data as well. And ultimately, while we found that, technically speaking, there is, promise for this type of structure, additional analysis would likely be required before feeling comfortable in approaching insurance markets. At the same time, so, the technical piece is, of course, one element of these parametric solutions, but almost equally important relates to the more sort of enabling conditions, implementation considerations. And in the case of, coral bleaching, there are still some questions, I think, that remain related to, for example, what the payouts would be deployed for if a triggering event occurs, right? If you decide to set your trigger at that value of 4 I mentioned earlier, or maybe somewhere between 4 and 8, what exactly could one do to help to minimize or mitigate the chance of a full-blown coral bleaching event from happening? There's some interesting, exploratory efforts out there looking at, coral shading, coral probiotics, all kinds of things, but there isn't, I think, yet a sort of scientifically proven intervention that would be deployed to, again, sort of minimize or mitigate coral bleaching, which calls into question what you would do with those payouts if a triggering event were to occur. Another really important implementation question relates to insurability, right? I think if markets have this perception that coral bleaching is more of a when, not if, then it makes it very difficult to get insurance markets to take on that risk, because it's more or less assured. It's like saying, well, my house is on fire, but can you give me some fire insurance? Probably not. So there's a question, again, I think, around insurability for coral bleaching specifically. So I think net, we sort of landed kind of in this yellow, orange zone for the coral bleaching one. If, it was to be taken forward by Forever Costa Rica, our partners, we would probably suggest that, they consider not only a parametric insurance solution, but also broader sort of prearranged trigger-based structures, meaning rather than, linking this as a risk transfer solution where insurance markets are taking on the risk, structuring it as more of a like trigger-based grant or concessional finance fund. So you set aside a pot of money and you use the same analytics and trigger approaches as a parametric insurance solution, but rather than triggering an insurance payout, you would trigger a grant or a concessional capital payout. Finally, on the third one here, so in this case, we were looking at agricultural runoff. So we looked at several different data sets. Ultimately, in this case, landed on the conclusion that a prearranged forecast-based finance structure didn't make sense. This was, largely driven by the Banana Grower Association's, quite frankly, already advanced practices in making data-driven decisions, very much informed by weather monitoring practices, as well as their demonstrated commitment to minimizing fertilizer runoff. In other words, developing a financial instrument solely focused on kind of short-term rainfall events didn't make sense from a sort of efficiency or effectiveness perspective. So interesting mix, as I said, kind of 2 and 3 here were very much feasibility studies. And as with all feasibility studies, you don't really know where you're going to land. But again, I think the coral bleaching marine heat wave one could show some promise. The agricultural runoff one, at least in that particular case in Belize related to banana growers, a parametric solution did not make sense. Next slide, please. So finally, before I turn over to our awesome partners, just a few, I guess, reflections or lessons learned from the W2W perspective. So clearly parametric solutions are not a silver bullet, right? And some, ultimately are not going to make sense from a technical and/or implementation perspective, as I've just demonstrated. But they can be worth exploring, or are worth exploring as one potential piece of a broader risk management and resilience, building framework. Of course, when people, I think, hear the word parametric, they tend to think of parametric insurance linked to private insurance markets. But as I mentioned, potentially for the coral bleaching example and possibly other situations, it's worth kind of broadening the lens slightly and recasting it more as a prearranged trigger-based structure, meaning using those SAM analytics, the predefined objective triggers, but not necessarily tying to or trying to transfer that risk via insurance markets, but rather linking it to the disbursement of grant-based or other concessional capital. The second one here, so on the applicability of hazards impacting coral reefs, right? Most existing products and programs address hurricane or tropical cyclone risk. The Mar Insurance Program, as Claudia described. There's also the Hawaii Coral Reef Program managed by the Nature Conservancy. There's a Fiji Coral Reef Program in the Lao Seascape managed by Vatuvara Foundation. But based on our analysis as part of this project, parametric solutions may be helpful for addressing other risks too, which, does, again, I think, cause some excitement, not only for coral reefs, but, potentially other ecosystems like mangroves as well. Relatedly, though, on sort of, when you're undertaking a feasibility assessment, it is really important to look at both the technical and implementation considerations. So even if you can identify an appropriate data set from a trusted source, you have that historical data, you have real-time data, and it seems like that data is a good proxy for the damage you're trying to protect against, you still need to know that there's going to be demand, right? You need to know that you have a policyholder who can demonstrate an insurable interest. They need to have a compelling payout use case for how they would make good use of those payouts if a triggering event were to occur. And of course, someone needs to pay for the product. So premium financing is, of course, another necessary piece of the puzzle. And then, of course, on the other side, sort of on the more supply end of the spectrum, there needs to be risk market underwriting capacity if we're talking about an insurance solution, or if it's a broader prearranged trigger-based solution, you need to make sure you have, a sufficient pot of grant or concessional capital that you could be triggering. And finally, just to note that, for all three of the components of our work, and quite frankly, for all of WTW's disaster risk finance work, we rely really heavily on our local partners for data, for feedback, for inputs. It's really, critical to have local partners who can help us to understand the feasibility and really ensure that the solutions that we're considering and designing and hopefully launching are ultimately fit for purpose for their particular circumstances. So yeah, just to quickly say thank you very much to all of the partners that were a part of this Aura project. It was a real pleasure and privilege to have the chance to collaborate with all of you. And with that, I'll throw it back to you, Jack, but looking forward to the discussion later. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. And I think what you demonstrated is, well, first of all, the amount of technical expertise which needs to go into designing these products, but also that these products fundamentally bring together two sectors, conservation and insurance, which traditionally have not talked to each other that much. And one part of that is if there are any terms which come out from these presentations which you do not know, please just put those questions in the chat, and we're more than happy to clarify them. We're sometimes speaking different languages, multiple languages, but also multiple versions of the same language. So any clarifications, I think, are really useful for these discussions. So with that, I believe in my agenda, I next have Pablo yes, from Fundación to speak about the work in Colombia. Pablo, over to you.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks for everyone attending this webinar and for Marfund for the invitation. I'm very excited to be part of this webinar, and I will try to share some of our experiences from the past 2 years in a few minutes. So I'll do my best. My name is Pablo Davis. I am Climate Change Coordinator at Fondo Acción, which is a Colombian fund that for the past 25 years has been making sustainable investments in 2 areas, in the environment and children. And we have been working in the archipelago of San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina in the Colombian Caribbean with different projects, all focusing on enhancing the resilience of ecosystems and local communities. So in the next slide, I'll give some context. This archipelago is part of one of the world's largest UNESCO biosphere reserves, the Seaflower Reserve. So it's very important to the greater Caribbean region as it serves not only as a biodiversity hotspot, but also as a climate refuge for literally thousands of marine species, and also contributing, of course, to support the livelihoods of local communities and the rights of people that live here. And coral reefs are of particular significance, as we've heard, and this is not the exception. The reefs in the archipelago are part of the 3rd largest coral reef barrier in the world, and they account for almost 80% of Colombia's coral reefs and are home to 60 species of coral reefs and over 600 fish species. And in fact, the coral reef cover and species abundance is among the highest in the entire Caribbean. And also, as we've heard, they're essential for the ecosystems they provide, the ecosystem services they provide, for marine life, for tourism, for fishing, and especially for coastal protection. They act as natural barriers, and they can reduce almost 90% of wave energy during storms and hurricanes. So this is vital for human safety and well-being, considering also the increasing frequency and intensity of these events that we are already experiencing. Next slide. So, however, despite all of these important contributions, the archipelago, being the region that least contributes to climate change in Colombia, is the #1 most vulnerable region in the country to the impacts of climate change, and is the area most likely to be affected by storms and hurricanes. As Sarah mentioned, in 2020, within just 2 weeks, the archipelago was hit by 2 hurricanes. And the impact of Iota hurricane in particular was devastating. This was a high-end category 4 hurricane that caused really unprecedented damage, destroying almost all of the infrastructure of the island of Providencia and damaging ecosystems very significantly. A study was made and an impact of over 80% to the evaluated reefs was recorded. And of course, the impact on livelihoods was really important, causing damages to fishing resources, food security, tourism, agriculture. And as it was really unprecedented, the great majority of the recovery funding went towards humanitarian aid, and very little, practically none, funds were received to recover these marine and coastal ecosystems. So just to mention that this event, as other climate impacts that we are already experiencing, speaks, of course, to the fragility of these ecosystems, but also to the urgency to act and enhance their resilience. Next slide, please. So the solution to face some of these challenges, of course, as Sarah well mentioned, this is part of the solutions. But since 2023, we have been working with ORA and Marfund and WTW and other partners that are here developing a first of its kind reef insurance program in Colombia. This is the first parametric insurance for coral reefs designed in the country. And as we know, unlike traditional insurance mechanisms, it is triggered just when a specific parameter is met, in our case, wind speed. And of course, this has many benefits. It doesn't require a lengthy or complicated assessments. The payout is automatic and quickly distributed to local stakeholders. So of course, this makes it a reliable financial instrument that will basically finance immediately all the costs associated with the recovery of reefs that are affected by hurricanes. So here with the leadership of WTW, you heard some in the past presentation, a parametric insurance was designed and structured for the archipelago. This was based on a reef damage model that considered the past historical events, the reef vulnerability, and also a cost analysis for this instrument. So along with a payout management structure that was structured defining how much is paid based on the intensity and of course proximity of the hurricane, and also guaranteeing that the funds flow very rapidly, and defining accountability protocols for the use of these funds that are managed or will be managed by a local operator. In the model, each island has concentric circles, as we can see here with the reef zones, and if a hurricane occurs, basically its path is mapped along with wind speed to determine what would be the payout amount. And this is the modeling of Hurricane Iota, which, had the insurance been in place, it would have triggered a payout of 80% of the insured value. So that could be almost up to $400,000 to restore these ecosystems. So yeah, as I mentioned, in reality, very limited resources were allocated for that purpose. So the potential is really significant. Next slide. Now, a key lesson and success of this project was to ground all of this in the local community and the governance structures. This was really crucial. So building partnerships, community participation, and local commitment. In this regard, first, a stakeholder engagement strategy was designed and implemented, integrating communities at every stage from planning to implementation. Also, a reef response plan and governance framework was structured with a local committee created, which is led by the environmental authority in the islands, but also has community participation. And very importantly, 45 local brigade members were trained. We had actually a much smaller target, but there was so much interest in these trainings that they were increased. So these were local people, so local fishermen, divers, members of local NGOs, government officials, environmental authorities, firefighters in general, like community leaders who have permanent presence on the islands and that are now trained to act immediately after a hurricane. And additionally, very important, 4 local people have been trained and certified as brigade instructors, so they can lead future training sessions in the island. So this guarantees sustainability and continuity of the project. Next slide, please. Then, very importantly, a long-term vision was created. Sarah also mentioned it. Financing is very important to make all of this sustainable. A financing strategy was designed. This with the objective of securing, of course, long-term and financing for the annual insurance premium that supports this rapid post-event response. And to achieve this, we have to guarantee resources from different stakeholder groups. All of those, which basically is all of the stakeholder groups engaged in the islands that benefit and have an interest in having healthy and resilient reefs. And of course, this was a major challenge, but also a great achievement of our project, as we secured resources to pay for the insurance premium with the support of the Blue Action Fund. So the insurance policy is already being quoted on the insurance market, and Blue Action Fund contribution is expected to decrease over time as funding from other stakeholders, particularly private sector is a critical sector here, is expected to increase. And finally, just the next slide, share some lessons learned that we've experienced with the project. The first one, I've mentioned this, local empowerment is really central to success and sustainability. as well as having a solid local governance structure, so that if an event happens, people are empowered and have the tools and are really prepared to act. Also, we found that the solutions actually go beyond just reef protection. So they support local livelihoods that are linked to fishing, to tourism, and all the ecosystem services that they provide. This was like a big focus of the project on positioning the benefits of protecting coral reefs, which is actually very cost effective. So not seeing it only like a cost, but all the benefits that having healthy and resilient reefs bring to different people and stakeholders. And success, of course, requires strong and committed partnerships. And this model actually, as Claudia mentioned, was built on the experiences of the Mesoamerican region. So it has huge potential for scale up and replication and can be expanded to other ecosystems. We're actually looking at mangroves now that are also very critical for coastal protection. And we are also working to embed this reef insurance within broader conservation and climate resilience strategies. We have a long-term project in the islands, in the archipelago, and we're linking this parametric insurance model within that long-term program, which will be developing in the next almost 10 years in the islands. So this is also very important, just not to be standalone projects, but to build in with other ongoing efforts that are being developed in the territories. So finally, with just like the right tools and the capacities and participation and the commitment from stakeholders, but also with this timely financing and governance, we can really face these challenges of climate change and build a more resilient future. So maybe I'll just end there. There is really hope and opportunity. And as Sadat, a local diver and brigade member, said, reefs are life, we depend on them, and therefore the responsibility to care for and sustain them belongs to all of us. Thank you very much, Jack. Back to you.
Thank you, Pablo, and just incredibly impressive what you and Fundación have been able to accomplish in such a relatively short amount of time. I think it's incredibly inspiring. And maybe just to preempt a question for our more panel discussion is, so you've heard already about how one solution in the MAR Fund has now been replicated in Colombia, and we'll be delving into some of the opportunities and challenges of replication and scaling, both in terms of new locations, but as Pablo mentioned, also to other ecosystems. So just to maybe just get some creative juices and have brains working, and we'll move to them in a bit. But for now, we're going to move over to Cristina from Costa Rica, who's going to be diving into some of the challenges and opportunities associated with using parametric insurance for coral bleaching. Cristina, over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to have you all here. My name is Cristina Sanchez. I am Chief of Projects in Forever Costa Rica. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper in the feasibility study that we conducted here for the impact of the heat waves in the Caribbean reefs in the country. Maybe to start, I would like to highlight that in Costa Rica, or in the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, coral reefs are limited to the central and south side of the country. So we have really few reefs in the Caribbean side, and Cahuita is the one that is well-developed reef, is a well-developed reef that is placed in the south side of the country. Also, it is important to mention that we choose Cahuita also because there is a national park. And as you can see in the picture, there is a barrier reef that is like the most important in the Caribbean side of the country. And the fact that this is a protected area, this limited or restricted some threats that as overfishing or uncontrolled tourism in this reef. So this is important also if we are thinking in a parametric insurance or financial mechanisms to support the conservation of the reefs. However, we have another threats that are impacting these reefs, mainly from sedimentation, runoff of agricultural lands, and also climate change. Now, related with the feasibility study, we identified some challenges. As Sarah mentioned before, the local information is crucial, and the absence of long-term oceanographic database hinders effective risk assessment. Although we had like NOAA database and there is an aqualink buoy in the site, further technical analysis is needed to determine the trigger value for the implementation of parametric insurance. Another challenge that is big is the oceanographic conditions that we have in our Caribbean, because I don't know if any of you have ever visited the Caribbean of Costa Rica, but it's completely different from the rest of the Caribbean countries or islands. We have just 4 to 5 months per year with good oceanographic conditions. And just in these 4 or 5 years, the local stakeholders can go to the reef to do tourism activities or even fishing, because we have a lot of rain, a lot of rivers, sedimentation, and also the wave energy in the rest of the year is really high. So this is a challenge, because if you are thinking in the actions to restore the reef or actions in the mitigation of the human pressures or the climate change pressures, is really hard to go to the reef in the whole year. So this is something that we need to think more about, what is the better way to attend the coral reefs when they are hit by heat waves or coral bleaching with these particular oceanographic conditions. Also, something to mention is that because of these oceanographic conditions, the coral reefs in the Caribbean of Costa Rica are limited to the first 12 meters. So if you think in actions like to place the colonies deeper to mitigate it from heat waves, the colonies would die because they are going deeper and they don't have access to light. So this is like a little bit of the challenge that we have here. Also, the frequency and intensity of events. This is for the whole region, and I guess for the whole world, we have more intensity and frequency of heat waves and bleach and coral bleaching. And this is something that is going to impact when you are thinking in parametric insurance, because the risk is going to be really high and the price is going to be high also. So taking into account all these challenges and these gaps, the feasibility study, at least for this first phase, is really low. Like, is the possibility of having parametric insurance for heat waves in the Caribbean of Costa Rica is low by now. This doesn't mean that this is for the whole countries and the whole reefs. This is just a feasibility study for Cahuita in a particular conditions, and actually it would be really interesting to see or to conduct a feasibility study in other country with other reef conditions to see if it's the same, or if this parametric insurance could be different with a feasibility to be implemented. Next, please. So with all this scenario, some actions that we need to continue supporting for the conservation of coral reefs are like building capacities in stakeholders like fishing sector, tourism sector, public institutions, the Marine Protected Area Rangers, supporting restoration projects. We had a local NGO that is doing restoration actions in Cahuita Reef. Also, like strengthening local monitoring systems. Actually, Forever Costa Rica supports the implementation of a coral reef monitoring protocol implementation in Cahuita, and we had like some data from the last maybe 8 years. So this is important to continue the monitoring in a long term to have this data, and also promoting community engagement. Also, the establishment of an early warning system and integrated nature-based solutions into coastal management is really important. So this is like a really brief like summary of the results that we have here in the Cahuita coral reefs, but I am sure that we need to go like looking for more solutions, financial solutions to attend these reefs. So we have a lot of work to do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And I think you do raise a really important point, which is this work on financing and developing risk mechanisms for ecosystems like coral reefs is very innovative. It's right on the cutting edge. And while that is very exciting, these solutions, as Sarah said, are not going to be relevant to every single location and every single ecosystem, which is why it's so important to invest in these feasibility studies with insurance and with conservation partners, so we can understand where these solutions work best, and then also build this evidence base so we can deploy them more cost effectively. So yeah, looking forward to diving further into those details, Christina, about what other solutions might be more appropriate in this particular case. But before we do so, we're now going to hand over to Israel Muniz to speak more about the ecological impact of reef rescue actions in the Mar region. Israel, over to you.
Thanks, Jack. Good morning, everyone. Well, my name is Israel Muniz, and I work as the Marine Science Officer in Healthy Reefs for Healthy People. And in our team, our main vision is for a thriving and healthy marine ecosystem where well-informed and influential reef shareholders are actively engaged in safeguarding this natural asset in the Mesoamerican Reef. And today, I will discuss our assessment of post-hurricane reef interventions in Belize and Mexico, focusing on their effectiveness and the challenges that we face right now. Next slide, please. The primary objective was to assess the ecological impact of post-hurricane reef interventions in Belize and Mexico, and our approach includes an analysis of existing ecological data from Healthy Reefs Initiative, monitoring, and partners data. In the Healthy Reefs Initiative, we have a collaboration with more than 70 partners in the Mesoamerican Reef, and all of them help us to gather information about the ecological conditions of the reefs in the region. In this project, I include a literature review, and I analyzed stressors like heat stress and coral bleaching, as we already listen about those stressors are really important right now in the region and in the Caribbean. And we actually gather insights from stakeholder surveys and working groups, and our focus was on 2 case studies in Puerto Morelos in Mexico and in Turnev Atoll in Belize. In both sites, in Puerto Morelos and Turnev, response teams followed established reef response protocols that Claudia already explained, which where they stabilize corals, they make an assessment of the damage, and followed by stabilization techniques, and then we evaluate the potential ecological impact of these interventions. Next slide, please. Well, now I want to look at our findings, and we saw some initial promising results in the case of the short term. And for example, in Puerto Morelos, stabilized corals showed a 95% of survival rate in a short term, and 70% of them were successfully stabilized. So intervention sites were really good after a short term. And as you can see in the graph at the right side of the slide, intervention sites had a higher percentage of stable corals compared to the control sites. So reinforcing the potential benefit of active stabilization efforts in a short-term period, right? In the case of the stakeholder survey, we observed that 43% of respondents saw high levels of reef damage after the storm. So they think that the reefs are suffering a high impact from this storm. And 31% of they think that interventions improved reef conditions, and only 8% don't think the interventions are effective. So most of the shareholders in the region think that these interventions are good for the reef and they are improved reef resilience, but there are their perceptions. So 92% of them felt well-trained for the emergency response, and almost all of them think that the response activities are really good and they are focused on good activities. They are doing a great job, but some of them are not clear about the long-term effect of these interventions in the case of the ecological resilience in the reefs, right? And well, something that we saw is that early assessments are crucial, especially immediate monitoring provides key stabilization insights and good survival information in a short term. And now I want to talk about the challenge that we saw during the project. In short-term evaluations of the intervention efforts show promising results in coral stabilizations compared to not intervening sites. However, monitoring over 1 or 2 years has not shown significant difference in coral cover trends, and this could be explained for different things. One of them could be that maybe coral cover is not the best metric for reef resilience right now, because we already have a really low coral cover in a lot of the sites in the region, so that could be not the best metric. And despite this, stakeholders remain positive and recognize the value of efforts in supporting reef resilience. Another relevant challenge is the limited number of control sites that make comparative analysis difficult right now, and the scarcity of Acropora-dominated habitats in the region that further constrains evaluation. And this is really important because Acropora is the group of corals that are mainly the focus of most of the interventions. So we need to have enough Acropora-dominated habitats in order to compare intervened with not intervened sites, right? And while immediate post-intervention assessments show promising early stabilization effects, long-term coral cover trends remain unclear, and well, this is something important. And then we have the added stress from extreme heat events, especially in the 2023 heat stress events in the Mesoamerican Reef, with over 50% of coral bleaching in areas like Turnev and Puerto Morelos. So this was a confounding effect and a compounding impact of recent hurricanes that hindered recovery efforts. And as you can see in the graph at the right at the bottom, the last peak in that plot represents the 2023 event. And you can see that the exposure of the degree heating weeks, that is a metric that Sarah already explained really well, was really high. So we observed values close to 15 degree heating weeks or 16 degree heating weeks. That's the double of the mortality risk threshold for corals. So it was an unprecedented event. And well, this highlights the need of adaptive management and improved local practices to enhance reef resilience and recover. And we need to incorporate heat stress and coral bleaching in these strategies, right? Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about the next steps and the recommendations. In the case of this project, I think that this was a learning journey about areas of opportunities. And we need to know where do we go from here, right? So first, we must enhance monitoring by implementing rigorous pre and post intervention protocols, increasing replication, and standardizing data collection. We need the same metrics across the region, right? We need the metrics for effort in the case of the interventions, and then we need ecological metrics to know the impact in the reefs of these interventions. We need to expand control size, and this will be key to refining impact assessment. And then we need to strengthen response capacity. This includes recruiting and training more brigadistas in some cases. And something important that was highlighted by the shareholders is that we need to create incentive programs to ensure an effective workforce in the region. And then another important thing is that we need to integrate thermal stress resilience into interventions. And we need to take into account coral bleaching in order to have better interventions and tailor approaches to a specific sites condition like heat stress exposure, hydrodynamics, or substrate availability and other oceanographic conditions. And then another important point is that we need to engage the stakeholders, and we need to have an open access data sharing platforms and improved communications. All these will boost confidence in intervention efforts and foster a stronger collaboration in the region. And I think that by addressing these challenges with the structure improvements, we can enhance the effectiveness, and scalability and resilience of the reefs in the region. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Israel. It's really interesting to hear that, and especially after Sarah's presentation, where she noted that the evidence base around interventions for coral bleaching events is perhaps not as strong as, let's say, hurricane. And this type of research is absolutely critical for building that evidence base, so we can develop best practice. And I think your points on the need for strengthening that evidence base further, but also around regional collaboration is absolutely key, so we can build this harmonized best practice, which is integral to developing these kinds of risk transfer solutions. So we're now going to move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. And to do this, I'm going to start by asking some questions, but I don't want to be the only one asking questions. So if you please do have any questions, please do add them to either the Zoom chat or the Facebook Live chat, and we'll be sure to get to them as well. But maybe just taking it back to our first presenter, which was Claudia, I'd be really interested if you could elaborate on the strengths of the MARA insurance program as you see it. Now, obviously, this is the original program in the work we've discussed today, and it's been operating the longest. And I'd be interested to hear your perspectives on, number one, why did the MARA Fund choose this type of instrument, and your reflections on its strengths and how cost effective it's been for you as you've walked through, I think, operating now for nearly 5 years.
Thank you, Jack. Why would we choose this type of instrument? I mean, this goes back to 2010, maybe. I wasn't working at the MARA Fund with the MARA Fund back then, but it is because, you know, there are several threats, and the importance of the coral reefs and the Mesoamerican Reef region, as I mentioned during my presentation, is that it provides several different type of environmental services, and of course it is beautiful. It's an important biodiversity hotspot, and it faces several threats, and one of these threats is, for example, as we mentioned before, the hurricane impacts. But the thing is that although there are some techniques and the possibility of providing immediate attention to the rift post-hurricane impacts, the funding is limited. You know, the funding to address these needs and to provide this immediate attention is very limited in the entire region. Perhaps because the importance of the reef is somehow overlooked, or because the funds available for conservation, restoration, and natural resources conservation as a whole are limited. And so we were looking at potential sources of funding, immediate funding to address these emergencies. And one of the consultants that used to work for the MARC from back then, her name is Claudia Alderman, she came up with the idea of an insurance, like a parametric insurance for natural assets, right? So basically the idea evolved during the time, and we saw that there was potential, and we agree and came up with several different type of alliances with we'll start with Watson, with even the Nature Conservancy and other partners, to come up and to design this insurance and to develop and brainstorm on how to design this mechanism. So the idea is to have an immediate funding that we can provide the resources needed to repair the reef, but also these funds can be used as well, I mean, to not only to purchase the instruments and to purchase the materials and the resources and all that are needed to mobilize the brigades, but also to pay for the date of work that the brigades are going to invest during these activities. So it is the payout or the funds from the insurance are beneficial not only to the natural ecosystem, but also to the people that is going to work and that works for the ecosystem. And so the strengths, for the second part of the question, the strengths are variable. You know, one of the main strengths is that we are working regionally. It is very cost effective. We have learned that having a premium, an aggregated premium that includes several sites, it is probably less expensive. It's less expensive than having separate premiums for separate sites by country. And also having a single administration also not only has the potential of including all these sites, you know, in one single premium, but also expedites the payout. So it is another of the strengths is that we can release the funds in a short time. Right, like for example, because it is a single administration and because we are a non-profit organization as well, and we have very well designed procedures that allow us to get the funding and administrate the funding and release it immediately to the site that has been affected by the storm. And perhaps having separate premiums for separate sites by country, it is a little bit, you know, not I don't have to explain this in English, but may not have the same impact, right? The same. It would be probably the payout would be such. It would be not possible to expedite the payout. But we don't know that. I mean, we have learned that this program can expedite the payout. Another strength is that we have built an entire network of responders. We have trained, as I mentioned before, more than 100 brigade members, responders from different sectors, including men and women. And so basically, they have not only working only on their sites, but also they know each other, they work together, they share experience, they are sharing learnings, they are communicating, and we have been able to drive this new knowledge to implement these new capacities, which is one of the main strengths and achievements that we have had. And of course, the replicability of the program. Thank you.
No, thank you, Claudia. I think it's really interesting to hear those perspectives as how one of the more advanced programs, both the successes you've had, but also just why, in your case, it is the most appropriate solution. And I think your point about scale is also really important. We quite often find these solutions need a certain number of sites to be cost effective. and the degree to which the Mar Insurance Program has now been able to be expanded to those 11 sites, as you showed, really does show how these programs can be successful. But maybe now, maybe Sarah, to you, because several people on this panel have commented on how climate change is impacting the ecosystems in which we're discussing today, and whether that's coral bleaching or hurricanes or many other effects. But obviously, climate change is a big picture, long-term risk for the insurance sector as a whole. But obviously, looking specifically here, it is starting to impact how we want to design these programs. So I would be really interested just to hear your thoughts about how climate change is impacting both the feasibility, but also the costs of these types of parametric insurance products.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. No, good question. So, look, climate change indeed is is causing, hurricanes. I think has been a hot topic of this particular conversation. So maybe I'll focus there. When it comes to sort of insurance and reinsurance market pricing, they're going to tend to look at recent history within the area of interest. So normally they'll be looking at, a combination of time periods, but let's say kind of the full historical, maybe the last 30 years, the last 40 years. And sometimes, they're also running a full stochastic as well. So, they're going to have a view of risk that is very much, I think, informed by, the more recent period, meaning that, the sort of change in the frequency and intensity of hurricanes due to climate forcing, sort of under a, 2 or 3 C degree world are really only accounted for to the extent to which these changes are already present in the historical hurricane, over the last few decades. So, not to say that as a result of that, future climate forcing under a 2 to 3 C world is irrelevant, but because pricing of insurance policies are usually on an annual basis, or most likely at most a 3-year policy term, the impact of that longer term climate forcing is really, going to feature quite minimally, or it should feature quite minimally. And I think, that's where the role of the broker who's helping to kind of facilitate the transaction between, the policyholder, whether that's Marfund or Fondo Acción or others, and the insurance markets, has an important role to play in sort of guiding markets towards a view of risk that is based on that kind of historical record, principally, and that does not sort of add some additional risk load or factor to account for, much longer range future climate scenarios that, again, should most likely not be played out in the next, 1, 2, or 3 year time. So I think, it's not to say that over time insurance isn't going to go up, but I think it's a longer range issue that, I feel like is getting probably more attention than it should. In other words, parametric solutions should very much still be considered, especially when it comes to the blue economy. I mean, we've discussed, today a number of solutions that help to support, the coral reef ecosystem, right? So the blue economy ecosystems directly. You can also design them for mangroves, right? Or seagrass. There's also ways that you can structure parametric solutions to support the livelihoods, right, that depend on those same ecosystems and their services. So products that are livelihood protections for small-scale fishers impacted by bad weather, which is exacerbated by climate change. And you can even, de-risk broader investments in the blue economy, wrapping parametric insurance around the issuance of blue bonds. So I think, it's still going to be a relevant solution to consider for the blue economy, whether it's the ecosystem or the livelihoods or the broader investments like blue bonds. Yes, you're going to need to bear in mind the insurance, costs. And I think also maybe just a final point is because the, future climate scenarios are what they are, as I was saying earlier, parametric solutions kind of, I think will need to be, I'm trying to use parametric solutions purposely instead of parametric insurance, right? Because I think the analytics and sort of objective triggers of parametric solutions can be quite useful, even if ultimately you don't end up transferring the rest to private insurance markets, but rather use it as a means to help deploy grant-based funding. So hopefully that's a distinction that I've been reasonably clear about, but yeah, again, I do think parametric solutions will play hopefully an ever-increasing role in supporting the blue economy along that spectrum of potential ways.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. And I think that's a really important you made there about the different risk time horizons we're looking at here. And as you noted, the insurance sector looks back in terms of the historical data, it's looking to formulate those products. And those products, as you said, are renewed on yearly or 1 to 3 year bases. That's obviously very different compared to the risk horizons we're looking at in terms of what the science is telling us about, for example, coral bleaching, as Israel said. And understanding those different time horizons is really important when we're thinking about which products might be viable in which context. And it's a really interesting segue maybe to Christina and the work you were talking about on coral bleaching in Costa Rica. And I think as both you and Sarah articulated so well, a parametric insurance trigger might not be the most appropriate solution here, but different types of parametric solutions, to use Sarah's term there, might be more appropriate. So I'd be really interested if you could speak more about some of the relevant opportunities and challenges you see in designing those kinds of funding mechanisms and where you see as the most relevant next steps being.
Yes. As we mentioned before, all of us, I guess we definitely need to continue the long-term monitoring of oceanographic data to support any financial mechanisms that could be feasible for us to apply in the Caribbean coral reefs. And also, for me, the big challenge that we have here in Costa Rica is the oceanographic conditions, as I explained like before, that makes really difficult to implement mitigation measures with these conditions. But also, who will be the buyer in case that we have the conditions and feasibility to implement a parametric insurance? And this is something that I didn't mention before, but in Costa Rica, we have, I don't know how to say it, but like the tourism is not at high-end hotel tourism. We have, yes, really expensive hotels, but not these big companies as we can find in other countries like Mexico, like in Cancun, or really high like diving tourism. We have a really low profile, for saying in some way. So who will be the buyer of this parametric insurance? For me, this is the big challenge. And something important is that in Costa Rica, we already have a legal framework to implement parametric insurance, but this is more for the agriculture. So how can we adapt this legal framework to address the protection of marine ecosystems as coral reefs? This is also a big challenge that we need to continue addressing and see which one is the best option that we have. I guess for now, thinking in financial mechanisms, the options that we have is the establishment of a coral reefs conservation trust fund. It's not easy, but this can give us sustainability, long-term financial for reef protection, restoration, and monitoring. Also, sinking funds, maybe with the tourism sector, that through voluntary or mandatory fees for conservation, that could be another option. And then continue seeking for grants to support conservation efforts. But yeah, we have a really a lot of work to do here, and we are excited to continue looking for alternatives.
Yeah, no, thank you, Christina. I think that's really clear on some of the challenges, but also where the opportunities exist in moving this work forward. And I think it also showcases the degree to which we can learn from other initiatives in the region and beyond. And some of the questions which you had there around, for example, who is the buyer of the insurance, but also the enabling environment and the frameworks in which this insurance will be placed, I'm sure are questions which Pablo and Fundación faced a couple of years ago. And maybe, Pablo, I might pose those two questions actually to you. Maybe in terms of like, why did you select parametric insurance, and how did you work with the enabling environment to develop such a successful product?
Sure, Jack, thank you. Yes, just to build on some of the things that we've discussed here before. So, of course, this is very innovative, and parametric insurance is a very proven mechanism in terms of coral reef protection, and I think is one of those parts of an integral solution. So this tool is very suitable in the specific site for the archipelago of San Andrés, Providencia, and Santa Catalina, because basically it provides such rapid funding based on this parameter. So this is something that we have not seen, and the process of accessing funds for coral reef restoration and protection are very complex and time consuming, and I think this parametric solution, I like the term that Sarah used, is very beneficial, because it provides addresses like this important issue of speed, which is very important to drastically reduce all the long-term damage that can be done that can be affecting the ecosystems. And of course, it enables like all this pre-planning and ensuring that local responders are equipped and ready to act. So building on this, like local capacities that are being implemented through this parametric design solution, which is also a lot of the success depends on this enabling environment, as you have mentioned. So we have seen that this is a solution that, of course, is not the only one. And as I mentioned, it can be embedded to broader conservation agendas. We are actually building an entire trust fund for the archipelago, and the insurance is part of this trust fund. So the idea is to give this financial sustainability, which we have heard over and over is very important. So I think this is a great pilot, and hopefully we can scale up. And as I mentioned, also we're considering other ecosystems. So I think that is part of your first question. And maybe if you can repeat the last one, like.
Yeah, I was wondering, just based on what Christina was saying around who is the buyer, how and that long-term financing. I know you mentioned obviously BAF is coming in with premium financing, but then I think you also mentioned that you're thinking that cost curve had private sector money coming in at some point. And I think it'd be really interesting if you could expand on that, because long-term financing of these solutions is always a common challenge, which we see when everyone tries to implement these kinds of solutions.
Absolutely, Jack. Yes, completely. I think it has to do a lot with bringing new stakeholders to the conversation. I think this is very critical in terms of finance as well. Within this like financing strategy, we have been talking with private sector, particularly the tourism sector. We've actually had an agreement with one of the main airlines in Colombia, which of course, if we don't have healthy reefs, like people will not be visiting and using the airlines to go visit this beautiful island. So just making like this cost effectiveness case for these private sector actors are critical. So within this strategy, we are also working not only with these private sector actors, but with local government as well, which has some funding. And yeah, just it's part of engaging with new stakeholders and building this case that this is cost beneficial for all of those stakeholders that are engaged. And as Cristina mentioned, this trust fund initiative is part of the long-term financing strategy vision, as there will be consistent and funds that will be used to buy these premiums with some sinking accounts, but also like a patrimonial account that will not be used, but just the like the interests that are generated from this fund will help to continue funding this insurance premium. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of that.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. I think your comments there demonstrate how, I think as Sarah said, parametric insurance is not the silver bullet. It is one piece of the solutions which we need to implement, but also how it's complicated. And actually, when we're thinking about long-term resilience of coral reefs and how we can finance that, it is this mosaic of funding of different sources which we can then deploy at different times to build this more sustainable financial future for these activities. So maybe shifting the conversation, because I think many people noted in their presentations and in their comments about how the potential and the challenges of applying these kinds of models beyond the initial successful case study, which is coral reef and hurricane wind speed being the parametric trigger, to whether it's other triggers like coral bleaching, but also potentially to other types of ecosystems. I think, Pablo, both you and Sarah mentioned mangroves. And maybe just opening up the conversation to these pieces, and maybe, Israel, I'll start with you because your research was directly looking at coral bleaching. And I'd be really interested just to hear your perspectives on how we can better integrate the type of ecological research which you've undertaken into these kinds of risk financing and insurance mechanisms. You know, what are your recommendations for how we integrate this data, which is the bedrock of these solutions, into these solutions moving forward?
Thanks, Jack. Really good question. Well, I think that in the case of coral bleaching, we need a really good prediction model and better early warning system, because right now we already have the Coral Reef Watch and the degree heating weeks, for example, but that is just about exposure. And right now, and we already know, we have more frequency and highest exposure in recent years. So we need to focus in the sensitivity too. So in the case of the ecological assessment, for example, in the case of the Mesoamerican Reef, we already know that there are metrics that better predict coral bleaching than degree heating weeks. So we need to use all this ecological information that we have into risk financial models and into early warning system. I think that is the first step in the case of compounding stressors, like could be hurricanes and coral bleaching, right? And well, we need to have more funds to incorporate data and monitoring on coral reef health, species compositions, and resilience, right? We need long-term monitoring data and included the response to restoration and climate stressors. And all this should be used to inform risk models by understanding how coral reefs respond to both direct intervention and indirect stressors like heat waves or hurricanes. We need to incorporate, and it's really complex because coral reefs are already a complex ecosystem with a lot of interaction inside between fish and corals and other benthic components or species. So it's already really complex. And I think that we need to establish a partnership for data sharing and risk assessment. So in this case, we need to think in open data access and frameworks, and we need to standardize in a regional scale. So and this could help us to have a better comparison between countries, for example. So if we want to compare the interventions in Belize and in Mexico, we need to have better metrics of this intervention, a unit of effort, but in a standardized way. And yeah, I think those are my main recommendation. And I saw that Mel already shared a paper that we published recently about coral bleaching and how we can predict in a better way coral bleaching in the Mesoamerican Reef. So thanks, Mel. Thanks, Jack.
But maybe while everyone's having a little think, I might ask one more, particularly around, as you said, like broadening the discussion a little bit to other kinds of ecosystems. And Pablo and Sarah, you both mentioned mangroves, and mangrove insurance is a hot topic in the space about how we can apply some of the successes in the coral space to mangroves. And as I think we've all discussed already, data there, like scientific-based responses and the enabling environment are some of the key pillars which these successful programs have been built on. And I'd be really interested to hear your perspectives about where some of the opportunities and challenges you see in applying parametric solutions and or insurance to mangroves. So I don't know if either of you or any of the other panelists for that matter have any perspectives they would like to share.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, but definitely, yeah, welcome others as well. So indeed, we've started to look a little bit about the potential for parametric solutions to support ecosystems such as mangroves. And I think for mangroves, you know, I guess much like any parametric insurance structure, indeed, data is ultimately what will underpin the product, right? So you need to have data to set that trigger. You know, for mangroves, what we've seen is most likely, again, this is always going to be location and context specific, but you know, most likely the biggest driver of damage will originate from hurricanes or tropical cyclones. So, you know, most likely the trigger would be wind speed or potentially wind speed and rainfall. Of course, you know, you need to have data for that specific place and situation from an, you know, independent, reliable source. You need to have that sufficiently long historical data set. So again, probably a 30 or 40 year history to help calibrate the parametric structure and ensure that you're capturing those damaging events, and also to help calculate risk metrics like expected loss to inform insurance pricing. And then, of course, as with all parametric solutions, you know, you need to have near real-time data to know whether a triggering of the policy has or has not occurred. So I think, you know, from a data perspective, probably, at least as it relates to sort of the hazard piece, there's probably good data out there. Some of the more kind of exposure and vulnerability data might be more lacking. And again, I think that's where we're seeing some advances through, you know, Earth observation techniques and increasingly sort of more on the ground data sources that can at least help to calibrate the modeling and ensure that you have the right sort of exposure and vulnerability assumptions in place. That's all kind of like the technical, you know, parametric solution structuring piece. But I guess just one additional that, you know, I flagged earlier that really should not be discounted when exploring parametric solutions, even when, you know, the technical piece is incredibly robust. The implementation and sort of enabling condition end of the spectrum is equally, if not more so important, right? So you need to know that there's a compelling payout use case should a triggering event occur. And I think, you know, as Claudia and others have spoken really well to today, for coral reefs and hurricane risk, there is strong, compelling scientific evidence that that immediate reef response is extremely valuable to enabling the ecosystem to recover post-hurricane. That same sort of scientific evidence and consensus does not yet agree or exist for mangrove ecosystems. And so that sort of payout use case piece for mangroves is something that I think does require some further attention and will, of course, be very driven by the local context and local partners. We have heard a few anecdotal evidence from, you know, places like Madagascar, where they're saying, yes, like having that immediate liquidity after a cyclone is extremely valuable, because if we don't get in there and start kind of dredging, removing debris, the fresh water is not able to travel where it needs to, and those mangrove fawns are going to die off. So I'm clearly not a scientist, but the local partners on the ground, I guess, need to be able to articulate what that payout use case is, be in a position to develop the mangrove response plan, much like the coral reef response plan, and then ultimately have the training and capacity and governance in place to execute that response plan if a triggering event occurs. So again, I think mangroves show a lot of promise, and is probably, from an ecosystem level perspective, the next, I guess, sort of frontier for parametric solutions, now that I think there's a great number of examples of coral reef insurance around the world. But it will be really critical to both understand the technical piece, but also the implementation into the spectrum as you look into those types of solutions.
Pablo, I don't know if you have any perspectives to share, particularly as you're thinking about implementing in Colombia.
Yeah, no, I think Sarah said it very well. I'll just add that the incredible role that mangroves play on coastal protection in the Hurricane Iota. One entire side of the island of Providencia is covered with mangroves, and they were completely destroyed. The impact was incredible, but they reduced the impact significantly. So, of course, it's very interesting to expand this model to such an important ecosystem. Of course, doing this, like identifying these triggers and these models, and building the insurance solution is part of what a lot of actors are doing in this very innovative spectrum. But I think it has great potential precisely because of the role that they play in coastal protection, and that is why both us and the Environmental Authority, which focused a lot of their efforts in restoring and recovering the mangroves after the hurricane, are very interested in providing funds to recover them after a hurricane hits. So it's very just beginning to look at this process.
Yeah, no, thank you, Pablo. So I see a question in the chat from Maria, and I think the question directed is to Israel, but any of the panelists are welcome to also offer their perspectives about the incentives to brigade members, and what types of incentives maybe you've been considering or you've seen successfully implemented. So Israel, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Jack. I will give a first response, but maybe Claudia could go deeper in this point. So, well, I think that the most obvious is a financial incentive, probably direct compensation and stipends. This because provide fair compensation for trained brigadiers is a good idea. A lot of them are trained biologists too, or professionals in this area. So I think this could be good. And another thing is that the professional growth and the capacity building is a good incentive, because they have different courses and training training classes and other kind of diving courses and that kind of things that are great for them, because they are having a good incentive there. And then is the non-monetary recognition. So that could be the three potential incentive that I can think about. And I think that MARFON and WTW are doing a great job in collaboration with different local and regional partners in that topic, but maybe Claudia, you could go deeper in that.
Thank you, Israel. I think you could have covered most of it. Yes, of course, there is an economic incentive. As I mentioned before, when there is a response action, the payout from the insurance can cover some of the daily stipends or daily fees for the responders that are going to work in the immediate attention to the reef. And another very important, besides all that have, in addition to what you have mentioned, there is another important incentive, which is that the brigade members are certified. They receive a credential, that allow them to work as a brigade, as a member, as a responder, reef responder, and they can be hired by any other organization that would like to have their services. So basically, it's not only, they are not like exclusive for the program itself, right? They can even, for example, the trainers that are involved, that are not only brigade members, but also are trainers, they can provide more trainings or more people to get knowledge on these type of things, and they can be hired by any organization, and they can charge fees for that. Thank you.
Can I share a short story there, Jack?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, because just recently, last week, some of the brigade members that were trained in San Andres and Providencia, we're really looking into how can they be sustainable as a brigade. So they were asking or telling us that they had this idea to formalize the brigades as an organization, because they saw an open call that was going to support conservation efforts, and they had this idea to present themselves, to organize as even a formal organizations of brigadiers to access funds. So just to mention that also there's an exciting part that if local people are engaged and committed, they can also mobilize and access different funds. They have the training, the certifications, and this is the direction that is going with the brigades in Colombia, which is really interesting. Just to mention that briefly.
Yeah, no, thank you, Pablo. I think that's really interesting. I think you all highlighted the local capacity building, which all of these programs have, and it's, absolutely critical and a centerpiece of this work. And whether it's, as you said, more of the financial incentives, which Israel mentioned, or the certifications and the skills building, which Claudia mentioned, the value which these programs can have, particularly around just the development of reef positive jobs in the local economy, I think cannot be understated. So maybe I also see a question from Israel in the chat about essentially, I think, the cost benefits of these types of programs in terms of the costs of setting them up and the premiums versus the payout costs. And I don't know, maybe Claudia or maybe Sarah, if you want to comment on that, because I think beyond the specifics of the MAR program, I think it's also just more of a bigger structural issue. So sorry for picking on you, but also welcome any of the other panelists if they want to comment on that question, because I think it is really important.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to mention here that, yes, there is an analysis that we have run, that we have conducted in terms of the economics and the cost needed to respond with the insurance and without the insurance. So this comparison, you can find it in the brief that I just shared through the chat, into the chat. I sent a link that has a brief regarding the MAR insurance program. So in one of, at the end on page, I think it's on page 12, you can find some comparisons. What would happen if there is not an insurance? What would be the costs, right? And yes, there is a comparison in terms of the investment that we have made in terms of premium costs. And I don't know, Sarah, do you want to add anything else? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. No, I think you covered it. I guess, I would just maybe say from a sort of broader perspective, as with all insurance, someone does have to pay, and it's, usually an annual premium. And the way that these types of policies are structured is such that, if you want the trigger, thresholds and the associated payout amounts. So I think, as Claudia mentioned, there's usually this kind of payout matrix. And, if you want a higher payout for a category, 1 or 2 event, it's going to cost you more money, right? So the more the payout amounts, and the sort of where you're setting those with respect to the hurricane intensities will impact pricing, potentially quite dramatically. Over time, as again, I guess with all insurance, right? Your insurance for your houses, for your health, you should be prepared to pay more than you are getting on a sort of, general basis, right? Of course, every individual situation will be different, but the insurance industry can only continue to exist, if basically you're paying more than you're getting out, which is not to say that you shouldn't have insurance for yourself or the coral reef ecosystems upon which, your organizations are committed to long-term conservation, et cetera. But, one should just be aware that it's insurance, it has a cost, and, you probably will be paying potentially more than you're getting out. But that immediate liquidity that it provides you at the moment when you need it most, when it is most critical to be in a position to support the coral reef ecosystem in the immediate aftermath of a hurricane event, is extremely valuable. But yeah, there's kind of the cost benefit analysis that one needs to do that Claudia mentioned. So yeah, I would definitely encourage participants to check that out.
Yeah, no, thank you, Claudia, for putting that study in the chat. I think it's really valuable. And I think, Sarah, what you're highlighting there is it's not a simple cost benefit in, money out. There are lots of different considerations and factors at play here, whether it's the threshold and the trigger and what you want covered, but also just thinking about insurance more broadly and what do we value. And in this case, what we're valuing here is that immediate funding to finance reef response, which we know is incredibly valuable from an ecological perspective. And in that case, it does make sense. But I think it's a good question to keep in mind as we're thinking about other types of risks and other ecosystems. Again, thinking about whether parametric is the right tool in these different circumstances. But yeah, no, thank you. So I'm mindful of time here. I know we've been going on for, well, nearly 2 hours now, and I just want to thank everyone for staying online for this really insightful discussion. I think from my perspective, I might spend just a minute or so just quickly wrapping up, I think, some of the major themes, and then I'll pass it over to the Mar Fund to close this session. But first of all, I just really wanted, again, to thank the Mar Fund and the partners we have on the call today for the fantastic work they've achieved over the last couple of years. I think the success both in expanding the original MAR program, replicating it in Colombia, and exploring some of these cutting edge additional stressors such as bleaching and runoff really demonstrate the innovativeness of the program, but also the real world impact it is achieving. And I think as we look towards scaling and replication, I think we heard multiple times how important scale is in some of these solutions, that, sometimes by increasing the size of these programs, we actually reduce the costs and it makes it more attractive. But also some of the barriers we see to scaling, whether it's data, the enabling environment, or having science-based responses. And I think in these cases, applying the lessons learned, and you'll see some of the materials which have been shared in the chat are perfect examples of this, ensuring that these lessons learned are encapsulated and communicated to the wider community, both in the Caribbean, but also beyond, is absolutely critical. From Aura's perspective, we have also just started a new project in Indonesia, where we're also seeking to replicate some elements of this insurance program for reefs there. And again, ensuring that these linkages are strong is absolutely key for, I think, scaling these kinds of projects in a way which is cost effective. And then I think one final point maybe, and maybe I'll just close on this, is I think Sarah's comment around parametric solutions. And I think also as we start thinking about what these solutions work best for and how do we apply them, I think keeping that in our minds about what are we solving for and what are the right solutions, whether it is full-on parametric insurance or different types of parametric solutions, is absolutely critical. And it's, I think, some of the research and some of the insights we've heard today really demonstrates that a lot of this thinking is already underway and already being implemented. And I think the question really now is how can we scale it as fast as possible so we can build resilience, obviously against the risks which we're all too aware of. So again, just a massive thank you to all the panelists today, and also particularly to the Mar Fund for hosting this session. And I'm now going to hand it back to the Mar Fund to close. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're ready. Thank you very much. I'm gonna share just one last slide to invite you to follow us in our social networks. We have here the information. And thank you, Aura, for supporting this project. Thank you to our speakers for your participation today. Thank you, you all. It has been a wonderful time with wonderful learning. So thank you so much and have a nice weekend for everybody.